Woo! Someone came up to me, actually it was kind of recent, it was recently, and they said, Pat, I was holding your son in the nursery, or in the class that he's in. This is my third son, Elias. And I was holding him, and I kind of was holding, and then I took a quick look at him, and then I just got so kind of like shocked, like freaked out. I was like, "Oh, what happened? Was he coming after you? You know, he's a wild one." He said, "No, it was just that he looked so much like you. It was like your face was on a tiny body, and it was so shocking." And she said, "And it was weird." Come on. Hey, whether that kid likes it or not, he looks like me. Oh my goodness. I hear that so often. Even he's the only one out of the three that actually have my eye color. And that was kind of cool. I was just kind of wondering, the rest have my wife's beautiful brown eyes, and we have brown eyes in the family. And I'm always amazed at how we begin to reflect, like how we can see ourselves in our kids. What I'm blown away at is the ability to see even past generations in physical attributes in our children. Like it's crazy when you can hear people say, you know, I don't, but my daughter has like my mother's hands. Yeah? Or like someone will be all, "Oh man, I definitely got my grandpa's nose." You know, it's pretty wild to think that even in what we pass down genetically, we can see shadows of ourselves and we can see pictures. If you were to put up pictures of my baby picture and Eli or Jaden, oh my goodness, you're like, which one is which? I wanted to show a couple pictures this morning just to prove that every now and then we can take pictures and actually look in the same direction. We got some family pictures up at Makapu, and it was really, really fun. At some point they'll pop up. And yeah, see, look at that. Oh, come on. And even just that, look at them. They all look alike. Except for Eli. Eli is the palest one of the three. Look at that. Oh, come on, let's go to another one. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's more like Dad. It's like, "Hey guys, it's time to go to bed," and that's usually their reaction. You know, when anything, you know, let's go to, there's another one with Tara, and I mean, just crazy. They look so much alike. And then let's see the next one, me and the boys. Oh man, look at those eyes. My goodness. And look at Jaden. I'm a grown man, mind you. He's 8. We're hoping that kid breaks the 5'4" barrier. We're hoping, fam. You can pray for me. Come on, we're going to break that ceiling. Amen? You can take those down. Look, those are the kinds of pictures that you use to fool people thinking you got your life together. And somehow in the midst of pictures that look so good, and sometimes in the midst of the moments that we don't feel like reflect ourselves the best, we still see something of God in them. What's amazing to me is that in the creation story, God begins this whole thing where he makes the birds of the air, and he goes in this whole thing. We'll get into that this morning. And he makes them according to their kind, the likeness. But there's something unique about humanity. And there's something unique about humanity that while it does share a created reality with all things that we see in the planet and our world, something so unique that we'll get into this morning. It's funny, what if I just fathered Jaden? What if I just fathered Jaden, but I didn't really want relationship with him? We would say, well, that's not a great choice, right? I mean, you could be able to see Jaden you can see me in Jaden, but if we didn't have relationship, it would change the dynamic of how we felt about each other. You know what's amazing though? If I was never in the picture, this is wild. If I was never in my son's life, if you had never met me, but you had met my son Jaden, you would still be able to see a reflection of me in him. I want you to think about that for a moment. Right now, you've never met my father. You've never met my father. But you are actually seeing parts of him in me, whether you recognize it or not. And you will never recognize it, at least not until we all get to heaven, we get to meet each other's families. But you are actually seeing a reflection of a generation in my family that you have never met. Family, God didn't just design a product in humanity. He desired a relationship. He desired a partnership with you and me. And I want you to write that down this morning. You got blank notes this morning because unlike that very put-together picture, my preparation time was not. But here's what, God desires partnership. He didn't just design a product in humanity. He desired partnership. He wants not only for us to exist and experience the world, but he actually desires partnership to accomplish his purposes. And if we look at the Genesis account, and here it is, Genesis 1:26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They'll reign over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. See, the Genesis account of creation, we have this incredible story of God making something out of nothing. Nothing was there, and then he at his word, something comes into being. And the author draws us into the first 5 days of what occurs. How God separated waters and spaces, how he made creation and creatures after their own likeness. We read repeated phrases in the creation account, and God said, and God said, and God said. But then something happens in verse 26, and it's almost like it's like God would surprise himself. Then God said. After all of those, and after the 5th day, and all of these things, and God said, and then he said it was good, and God said, let's do this in creation. But then this moment that had never happened up until this point, and you can read it in the ESV, it says, then God said. In one verse, we see the creation story here creating something different than anything else that had been created up until that moment. By its very nature and its existence, it reflects in some way God's being. The personality and the existence of God himself. Then on the 6th day, God made man. There's nothing quite like us on the planet. And I know sometimes, even just saying that, I think we would be even frustrated. You're like, yeah, I know. There's nothing quite like the mess that we can create as humans. And yet, even in the midst of all of our weakness and all of our brokenness, there is nothing quite like us. He says a couple words repeated, and God said about 7 times. It was good 7 times. 3 times he says created. God looks over all of the world, and then he said, it is very good. In fact, for humanity, after that day, he said it was very good. Somebody say very good. Somebody say very good. It was like the culmination, the crescendo of this entire story of creation ends with humanity. And of course, the whole point is to give glory to God who created all of this. But there's something in humanity. This moment in time was so abundantly good because it had never happened before in all of eternity. It was very good, and that has not changed today. You in your seat, you as you came in this morning, you in your drive on your way to work, you are very good in God's eyes. I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm not saying that we don't have mistakes and that God is not taking us through process, but there is something about you in which I can see the very image of God. I wonder, are we engaging with this anchor? We're in the 2nd week of our Anchored series. The first one we talked about good news. And are you still in a good mood over the good news of the gospel? Now we're talking about the fact that we're in God's image, an anchor point in our faith that has dictated the way in which Christians have lived for thousands of years simply because they reflect the nature, the very image of God. I wonder if you have allowed that recently to wash over you, that you reflect God's image. In this moment right here, this is what's so powerful. This is why it matters. What does it say about God? What does it say about man? And then how do we live? And we're going to cover some of those things. But right now, as you sit, here's what's amazing, and you can write this down, is that being an image bearer of God, the fact that you reflect His image, what is beautiful and powerful is this, is that God this morning wants to rescue us from the slavery of our performance into the freedom of His presence. That the only thing that makes us unique among all of creation, and it is a very important thing, is the fact that He gave us breath, and He gave us an ability to think and a consciousness and an ability to engage with Him. We are the only creation specifically designed to know Him, to partner with Him. So why do we settle for these secondary markers of significance so often? Why do we settle for things like you literally reflect the God of all of the universe? But what I want to say is that I am a pastor. And that is the fullness of my identity. Oh no, it's not, family. It is simply the role that I serve in this short breath of life that I exist on this planet. But for forever, for all of eternity, I will be a son of God that reflects the image of God. We reflect God's image in a way that the angels never will. Can you be blown away about that this morning, please? I mean, I'm begging us to be so blown away at the reality that for generations, the angels have watched humanity, and they're looking and they're like, it's crazy that they reflect God's image in a way that we don't. They're flying around with wings and stuff. I don't know if angels have wings. I haven't seen one yet. That'd be awesome if they did. But even if they did have wings, it doesn't matter, because I reflect God's image in a way that they do not. Even in the New Testament, Jesus says that you're actually going to judge and be over nations. You're actually going to tell some angels what to do. Family, I want you to be overwhelmed by the reality of every part of you, perfect, imperfect, strong, or weak. Right now, your significance and the beauty of God's love is that you are everything that He wants you to be as you sit. Is somebody in a good mood about that this morning? Of course there's work to be done. Of course there's things that we need to figure out. And of course He's taking us from glory to glory. But I want us this morning to not move over the reality that God looks at us and He sees something good. When I first looked at Jaden in that hospital room, when I saw me so little, and the first one, you're so like, I mean, it's like you think like everything, I didn't know how to hold him, right? You just think everything's going to break him. By the third one, you're just kind of tossing him around as everything's fine. You're not doing that. But I remember looking at him, and right from like the get-go, I was like, whoa, I can see myself in this little thing. And then as the days went, it's amazing how they change. Even within the first week, it was like, oh, there I am some more. And then there's Tara. Oh my goodness. She's got it. Her nose. And that's good. You don't want this nose. You want her nose. Oh my goodness. Same thing with Mia. Mia came out just dark hair, furry arms. She's going to hate if I ever tell that to anybody when she's like 16. I mean, just for dark, she just looked, it was like, there's Tara, there's Tara. Eli was like, how did a baby get so white? But then he opened his eyes and I was like, oh my God. About a month later when the color began to and I was like, there I am. And right then and there, for all three of them, and it continues to be true, if I allow it, now, they hadn't offered me anything of value. They didn't say, "Hi, Dad, we're just so happy you made us." "Mom, thanks so much for all that 30 hours of labor. Really appreciate that. We'll be paying you back for the rest of our lives." There was no appreciation in that moment. In fact, the next few years, and in fact, up until then, they're going to be freeloaders. Right? They're freeloaders. I told my son the other day, "Hey, get a job." He said, "I'm 8. I said, "I don't care." He said, "My job is being a kid." I was like, "Who told you that?" He said, "Mom." And I was like, we got to get on the same page here. The only value he had at that moment was simply that he existed. The only value that he had. I wouldn't even know how much he would complicate our life in all the good and hard ways. I didn't know that. I didn't see it. I didn't know that, months later when we couldn't understand why he was crying and how that would tax us emotionally in so many ways. But he had value because he existed, not because he did something for me. You don't need to do anything for God for Him to see eternal value in who you are. You've been adopted as a daughter. You don't need to prove your worth at the table of Jesus to say, "Look, see, you can love me, you can like me a little bit better." No, He says, "I don't need any of that. I already decided that I liked you. I already decided that I loved you. I love you." Family, it's good news. That's actually part of the gospel. That's great news, fam. If you've been striving in this place to feel like God is in a good mood over you, please hear me. He is in a great mood over your life. I'm not saying that God is in a great mood over every decision you and I have made, because if we were to ask His opinion, I'm sure He'd be like, "Well, I don't know about that." But He loves us in spite of us. For some performers in the room, this is hard to hear because we spend so much of our lives trying to define ourselves by these other markers that in the reality of eternity have no significance at all. And so we'll put our guts into a career for 40 years and we'll say, "That was me." But at some point the career ends. At some point Jesus is coming back. And what He will not say is, "Great job on your career." He will say, "Well done, my good and my faithful servant. Well done, son. Well done, my daughter." I want us to be so excited about our work being worship because we're there most of the time. We want to bring who we are into the workplace, but there's that fine line where the worship of our hands then doesn't become the identity and the source of our own significance. And the image of God is such an anchor to that reality because it will set us free from having to perform our way into God liking us. Family, if we are not careful, we will bring up the next generation thinking that they have to perform for us in order for them to get affirmation. There are moments in time when I forget that Jaden had value before he had good grades. That Jaden had value before he could hit that baseball, and I was so proud that he got that double yesterday. You know what I'm saying? Like before that moment, he had value simply because he was. And that's you and that's me, fam. I don't ever want to graduate from that class. Come on, let's put on the white belt of our understanding of Jesus. Let's learn a little bit again of what it means to reflect His glory. See, the story goes on. Genesis 1:28, then God blessed man and woman. He said, "Be fruitful and multiply." Come on, multiply. We got so many kids in the ark right now. Y'all doing some multiplying. Hey, that is proof of God's presence. Somebody say amen. Woo-hoo, okay. The Lord God placed man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. There's this beautiful thing about who we are as His reflection in His image, and then what we are like doing, what we're here, and there's purpose called into, even in the same moment in the Genesis account. And it's one of the reasons why later Paul will encourage churches like the Colossian church to be reflectors of God's image in whatever they do. He'll say, don't lie to each other. Don't do the old stuff. Don't do that broken nature business, because put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. This week, have we put in time to learn to know our Creator? Look, fam, some people maybe give a criticism. Oh, maybe we just come to church on Sunday, or maybe we just come to church on Easter and Christmas and those kinds of things. Look, hey, if that's when people are coming to church, that's when they're coming to church. I'm happy that people would come to think about the reality of who they are and how they would want to live for an hour a week, even if that was the only thing that they did in that week that brought up those questions. Because most of us during the week are just in the grind. We're not considering our own mortality, at least not until we get bad news from the doctor. We're not considering the legacy that we're passing on that might affect 20, 30 years from now. I'm so happy that in these moments we get to celebrate and laugh and cry and sing and do all of those things, and to think about the reality of God, what that means for how we live. Paul continued to say, if in this new life, it doesn't matter who you are, Jew or a Gentile, it doesn't matter if you are civilized or uncivilized, slave or free, Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. Can you say this with me? Say, He lives. In me. He lives in us. See, God could have stopped at creation. He could have stopped at simply creating Adam and Eve. He could have ended it right there, but He did something that would enhance their innate image-bearingness. He gave them a job. He didn't just say, you exist. No, He actually, out of that being, He said, now this is how you'll be your doing. He gave them a job. Shortly after God takes time to create humans, He gives them purpose. Creation itself was so unique. It had never been before, and now in a moment of time, it simply was. Yet more than even that God made something distinct within His own creation. This is so powerful, is that while creation itself would reflect God's beauty, it would reflect God's creativity, it would reflect to some degree God's personality, only humanity could possibly reflect His purpose. Come on. In all of the created order, as people gathered, Jesus lovers who think that God had a hand in creating the world, that there was nothing, then there was something, and that all of the beauty was there, but only you, as you sit in your seat, can reflect the very purpose of God. A sunset can't do that. Family, a sunset can't do it. It doesn't matter what wave that you surfed all around the world and how beautiful and how cathartic, and I want all of those experiences too. But only you and I reflect the purpose of God. You cannot look at a sunset and see the purposes of God. You'll see His beauty. Romans says that nature declares that there is a creator, that nature itself is a testimony. Psalms will say that like the resume of God is written in the created nature and created universe. But only you reflect the purpose of God. I want that to sit with us because it is so affirming and it is so beautiful. But it comes with it responsibility, doesn't it? That's why I want you to write down, creation reflects God's qualities, but only humanity reflects His purpose. Creation reflects His qualities, but only humanity reflects God's purpose. We exist as a reflection of God's image, which carries really transformative love and incredible responsibility. Because God didn't just design a product, He desired partnership. He said, when you go, be fruitful and multiply and take care of my stuff. He said, take care of it. And now more than ever, the conversation of how we take care of God's stuff is so important. He cares about the way we treat our land. He cares about the way that we treat our treasure. He cares about the way we steward our relationship. God cares. Because in the ways we do that, we reflect more of Him. We begin to look more like Him. No, not in the perfection, but in the faithfulness, in the simple obedience of trusting Him and all of those things, we begin to reflect more and more of His image. It was simultaneously the reality that at the moment God made us image bearers, He also made us mission carriers. Woo! In that moment that He made us image bearers, the moment that He blessed us with eternal and infinite value and love before you were even in your mother's womb, He blessed you with that reality, is the same moment that that reality overflows into being a mission carrier of His love. And the way in which we treat other image bearers tells us a lot about how we're interacting with this anchor point of truth. Not just saying image bearers that look like us, not like just like our kids or people that look like us, like our personalities, people that it's easy to get along with because you're an image bearer, I'm an image bearer, it's all awesome. Image bearers that you might consider an enemy. And the way in which we treat them is a huge reflection of the way in which we are engaging with this reality way, way back in Genesis. Jesus will talk about it later when He says, love your enemies. That's not fair. You're absolutely right. It isn't fair. You know what's amazing is historically, right? Like we were kind of talking last week that historically there's been, or presently, that the church or the sense of religion is sort of, to some degree, getting some bad press. And there's lots of reasons for it. And they're legitimate reasons. There's things that people took for granted. There's people that have abused power. There's people that have abused all of these things that they've done that has had a poor reflection. It's hard to see God's image in them. And yet, as broken people, they still reflect it. But what I want to anchor back to is the reality that for thousands of years, believers that were not in positions of power, believers that were the most marginalized people on the planet, believers like in 1st and 2nd century Rome, who went out of their way to love their enemy or their perceived enemy. This is so powerful. When the plague hit Rome in that 1st or 2nd century, and everybody's running out of the city. I mean, everybody. All of the systems that were in place to save the people, the doctors, the medical community, the philosophers, everybody just jammed out. In fact, at one point, they tried to actually create sort of a welfare system to take care of all the people that were having these plague issues, and it's spreading. This is wild because they were like, look at what the Christians are doing. They're like serving people in the middle of all this stuff. What happened was that Christians, while their neighbors were running out of the city, Christians, because they were image bearers of God, Christians, because they carried the weight and the responsibility of God's love for other people, they stayed. They stayed, and instead of running, instead of doing what all the other people were doing, they stayed and they served and they ministered to their neighbors who would be actively persecuting them because they didn't believe what they believed. And in that time, if you didn't believe in multiple gods, you only believed in one God, you were the atheist, not them. Can you imagine that? You were the atheist. And this is what's wild, because in that moment, what would happen is someone would die, and then Christians would pool their resources together because they reflected God's image and His love, and they carried that responsibility seriously. They would pool together resources, and they would pay for a funeral for their neighbor that had been actively persecuting them. Love your neighbor. Here's what I want us to be challenged with, and it's a simple point of application is this. Let love lead you to action. Just let love lead you to action. And it doesn't need to be big, it doesn't need to be elaborate, but it's got to be something. It's got to be something, even if it's a half-hearted something. Just let it lead you to something. Let it lead you to somewhere. Get involved somehow. Start small, but start somewhere. And this is where I would encourage us as believers. This is where I would encourage anybody, is this. In a culture, in an age of rage, when everything is so politicized and nobody seems to be able to have a conversation without somebody being demonized fully and completely. You don't agree with me, therefore you are like evil incarnate. No, I would challenge us as believers in the way in which we dialogue with people who are actively disrespecting us. Dialogue with people who are simply, but just simply disagreeing with us. I would ask us to fight for the way in which we dialogue so that by how we speak, people can see the eyes of Jesus. Wouldn't that be a revival that we needed? Now, some of like, that sounds softy, Pat. It sounds a little too soft for me. People got to know the truth, so I give them the truth. Woo! Hey, man, I love it. Be about that truth. But Jesus had all of the truth embodied in all of his being as the divine and the human. And what did he say? Love your enemies. I know we're used to coming from positions of resource and power and influence. But imagine if all of that was taken away and all you had was simply the way in which you lived your life and the words with which you spoke to a neighbor that no one else would see or hear. You couldn't post it on Facebook. Oh, fam, the way in which we treat others that we disagree with might just be the witness this next generation needs to see to usher in revival. It's possible. It's possible. When it's so easy to just spit all that fire out on Facebook, to forward another BuzzFeed article about this and that. No one's reading that anyway. It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, we surround ourselves with people that we just all agree with, and then we're just lobbing bombs, and we think we're doing God's work. Family, let your love lead to action. Let love lead to action in the ways in which the spiritual fathers and mothers of our faith were led, that at great cost to themselves, they served those who actively persecuted them. So how am I living as someone who bears God's image? See, only humanity was created with the explicit purpose of knowing God. And it's our nature in knowing God that calls us both to character and to a cause. Paul later will write this to the Ephesian church. He says, throw off your old nature, please. Your former way of life, just toss that. And family, we're coming to a close in our service. And so, our worship band, if you guys want to get ready to come on up. Throw off the old way that was corrupted by lust and deception, and instead let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on a new nature. Say new nature. Put it on, fam. Created to be like God. Say like God. I didn't say, this is in the Bible, so you're like saying, oh, Pat thinks he's like God. Well, I didn't say he said it. I didn't say that. And I have no aspersions that somehow I'm divine. You would have to be much taller than I am to be divine. Look, he says, put on your new nature, created to be like God, and truly and righteously and in a holy way live your life the way that you were called. Blaise Pascal, he was a philosopher. He said this, and I was so blown away by it. He said that he would look at the universe, he would consider creation. I don't know if you've stood under those stars lately and just been overwhelmed by how small you are. And he would be so intimidated when he looked out at those stars, he would almost be afraid. But then he said he had this revelation, this understanding, this breakthrough, this paradigm shift in which he said that even in the midst of an ever-expanding universe, in the midst of all of this stuff that he is so dwarfed by comparison, he said there is not one moment of history, there's not one moment in creation where the universe has ever given one thought towards him. but He had the ability to consider the universe. Oh, the universe in all of its expanding glory, screaming out a testimony of God's reality, and yet you as you sit, you scream out more of the love and the heart of God than any other thing that has ever been created, that has ever existed. I hope it overwhelms you. I hope it changes Sunday afternoon for you. I hope it changes how you tip somebody when you go out for lunch after church today. I hope it changes something in us. Because some of us are sitting here thinking, there's just no way, man. I mean, that sounds good, and it's even inspirational, but there's no way that you're going to tell me that in my broken state, with all that I've done, that I reflect His glory. You don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. You may not see the image of God in yourself, but it's there because He breathed it into you. And He knew you before your mother. He knew you before your great-grandmama. He saw you in the spectrum of all eternity and time. And He said, I have chosen you, and I loved you, and I have chosen you, knowing all that you would do, knowing all that you have done, and I have chosen you to reflect the beauty of my love. Oh, and I know it feels good, but with that carries such a powerful responsibility. We are not a product to be designed and simply created. He desired partnership with you and me, family. This morning, as a church, let's get so excited that we get to partner with a God who can see Himself in us. Amen?